top music teachers. My name is Janna Williamson. Welcome to my home piano studio in the suburbs of Chicago. I teach independently here in my home as well as work with other piano teachers. Hopefully you've seen some of my videos in the Piece by Piece series that I've been making for Top Music Pro. I really enjoy doing those, so I hope they've been helpful for you. I teach out of my home and my studio fluctuates between about 16 to 20 students here and there. I do teach my own children, so they kind of count as my students, but they don't pay me for it. So it kind of fluctuates based on what exactly I can fit in my schedule. And then I do also work as a collaborative pianist, working with singers and instrumentalists around the Chicago area and performing that way. So lesson planning, what are the benefits of lesson planning? Well, this really depends on how experienced of a teacher you are and what kinds of materials you're using. When I was younger, I've been teaching professionally for 20 years now, and when I was first starting out, I just didn't know the material. Even though I'd taken pedagogy classes and I had a good sense of which materials I wanted to use and why, because I had studied particularly the elementary beginner methods, I still didn't know the intricacies of every single little piece and the way that various method books taught different technical concepts and all those sorts of details. So when I was younger, I did a little bit more. I primarily did the bulk of my lesson planning when I was teaching group classes. I worked at a Yamaha music school for many years, and I would make very detailed plans for those groups, because especially when you're working with young children, 4s and 5s, you don't have any room to not know what you're doing. I always joke that preschoolers can smell fear. So if you aren't sure of exactly how you want that lesson to go and what your pacing is going to be with students in a group format, it won't go as well as if you're pretty clear on what you want to do. When we're teaching private lessons, we have a lot more flexibility to tailor the lesson to the individual student, to kind of see what the student has done throughout the week as they were practicing or not practicing at home, and be more responsive to that. And so truthfully, now in my teaching, which is a lot of intermediate level students, I don't do a lot of actual lesson plannings where I write down what I think I'm going to do for each lesson. However, I keep all of my students' assignments on a Google Doc, which the same kind of process would work on Tonara or some other app like that. I have digital access to my students' assignment sheets throughout the week. So if I want to check in on what pieces they're playing or notes that I may have made to myself, like, Janna, be sure to introduce this next week or something like that, I can always check that throughout the week, and maybe even the morning of their lesson pull up their assignment sheet so I have in my head what we're going to do that day. Now that said, if I'm doing some sort of studio-wide project, like everyone is working on XYZ, then there will be more specific planning that goes into place, and I might actually make handwritten or digital notes as far as how I want to do that project with each individual student. I do spend time repertoire planning, and this is more challenging the more advanced your students get. So I spend more time planning repertoire for my early advanced students and late intermediate as well. For a lot of my intermediate students, I put them in intermediate repertoire collections. So again, I don't have to plan every single piece of music. I know that they have a book, an anthology that we can choose pieces out of, and once we've reached kind of the tipping point of learning as many in there as I want to, we can move on to the next level or choose a different collection to use. Okay, any don'ts in lesson planning? I would like to caution teachers not to actually be too rigid in their lesson planning, because we always want to have student-centered lessons. And so for whatever reason, either the student is emotionally not in a good state, they didn't have a good practice week, or for some good reasons, like a student came in very excited about something that you had no idea they were going to do, to bring in, then we want to be able to respond to that in time. I had a student last week bring in an arrangement of Canon in D that I had no idea she was going to work on. She found it online and printed it off and played the whole thing for me without me knowing she had even begun working on it. So of course I wanted to spend time in that lesson working with her and helping her achieve an even higher level of ability on that particular piece. And then when a student does something like that, like says, I want to learn this, or I want to play this, or hey, I brought this song in, then it starts my wheels turning on, okay, they're really motivated by this particular thing, and so I need to, in future planning, think about what else I can find for them that's going to scratch that same itch. I think the way that I'm most helpful in this particular topic is talking about assignments. I would never, ever send a student home with no written record of what they are supposed to do throughout the week. First of all, they won't remember. I wouldn't remember if I were them. I can't remember what I did this morning because I just have too many things going on in my life. So it's really important to either handwrite or write in some sort of digital app or context what you want the student to do at home. And I am passionate that this should be extremely clear and detailed. It's more important actually, I think, at the lower levels, or maybe not at the very beginning, because very beginning pieces are so simple that there's only so much you can do with them. But late elementary through mid-intermediate, I think those are the real years where you truly learn to practice, where you are dissecting a piece of music on a page, or learning the analytical tools of some sort of improvisation or composition project, and it's the teacher's job to teach a student how to practice. So I have a massive toolbox of practice techniques. My students all learn the titles or the names for those practice techniques, and then we write them on their assignment sheet, which again I use as a Google Doc. So yes, you have to do measures 9 through 12 using 7 stages of misery. If you don't know what 7 stages of misery is, that's from Philip Johnson, and I think his book called The Practice Revolution. My students learn all these terms, and then it's not that I direct everything for them and I just write out their sheet and in a kind of dictatorship way say, you have to do this, this, this. I simply ask them, okay, let's find the trouble spots. Let's figure out what you're going to practice this week. And then I ask them, once they have some vocabulary for this and we've worked on these things before, what do you think would be some good practice strategies for this piece this week? When I'm assigning a new piece of repertoire for a student, we always take time to look at the piece, whether this is elementary level or intermediate or advanced. We always take a good chance to look at it. Maybe I have performed the piece for them as an example one time, and then we're really looking at the score. We find the sections, we look and see what looks like it's gonna be tricky. Maybe the student picks out something that they think is gonna be difficult that actually isn't difficult, and I can say, oh, you're really not gonna struggle with that part. And I might point out something like, but you know what? Every student has trouble right here. And then I ask the magic question. How will you practice this piece? And I can guide them through the process of figuring out if it's a longer piece, how much they're going to tackle in that first week, how they're going to approach first practicing this. You know, if it's contrapuntal, they're going to want to do some hands separate. If it's got broken chords, we're going to label some of the chords and block through them, all those kinds of things. And then I will write all those things down on their assignment sheet so that they can remember what we talked about when they go home and be the most efficient that they can be for their age and their level of experience at this point in their study. Is there anything that I do differently now in my lesson planning than I did when I was maybe teaching when I was younger? So when I was less experienced, I used more materials that were very teacher friendly, such as elementary method series that you might call a turn the page series. You know, you finish one piece and you turn the page and you move on to the next thing. And the method book really guides you through all of the concepts, explaining them, lining up all the pieces for you in a really stable progression. Things like Piano Adventures. Piano Adventures is an excellent method, but it is very much a self-explanatory. You don't have to do much lesson planning on your own. And so I always recommend for new teachers that they start with some sort of method like that, simply because it is much easier and you don't have to get overwhelmed. Now that I'm old and I've been teaching forever, I tend to use more materials that allow the teacher to have more freedom and choice in how they do things, primarily around elementary methods. I use Piano Safari more these days, but also I feel free to use materials in the intermediate and advanced repertoire that require me to make more choices about interpretation. And that's just because I have the experience and the knowledge and the ability to do that. And when I had less experience, I used materials that I knew would support me in answering some of the questions that I had at that time before I had taught those pieces so many times. And there's no shame in using really high quality student editions or teacher editions, things that help you make a lot of those decisions and help you teach in a really good way.
Hey, just before you go, make sure you click here to subscribe, and we've got thousands of other videos all on the topic of music education and teaching, so make sure you check out some of those other ones here, and I'll see you in the next video.